You got $1 in your wallet, kid. Can you afford to think that small?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of The Penguin. We're going to be discussing episode 1 today, entitled After Hours. We will start by talking about our overall thoughts on the show, and then I will dive into a recap of what happened this episode. But Patrick Klepek, in one sentence or so, do you think people should watch the show?
Yeah, absolutely. Colin Farrell, who you will constantly forget is Colin Farrell, as you did in the Batman film, is just a force of nature, just impossible to look away from, both from the makeup and suits that he's in, and also just performance. It's a really electric first episode that sets the stage for a season that I'm not actually sure what's going to happen, which is kind of exciting all on its own.
I am a little less positive on it than you. I think it is worth checking out. We're obviously going to dedicate a ton of time to it on Decoding TV, and I come away with an overall positive impression of the show. But to me, I've used this analogy before, where you know how there's the Muppets, and then there is this thing called Muppet Babies, right? Where it's like it's not the Muppets. It's like kind of a even more kid friendly version of the Muppets. This show, The Penguin, is Sopranos Babies. It is a lighter, more kid-friendly version of The Sopranos, if you can imagine that. I mean, what I would say is I don't find it as thematically rich and well done as The Sopranos, even though it's trying to cover much of the same territory. But it is fun, and I will say that Colin Farrell and Cristina Milioti, in my opinion,
oh my
honestly,
God, going for it.
She is incredible in the show, and so just those two people doing what they're doing in the show, that's enough to keep me like hooked on the show
For sure.
But yeah, as for the rest of it, we'll get into it during our recap. But overall, I think pretty solid. Some interesting stuff here, and 2 spectacular performances I'm looking forward to covering. So, The Penguin episode 1 opens with a summary of the events of the Batman, recapped via a series of news reports. We also learned that Alberto Falcone, son of the assassinated mob boss Carmine Falcone, is set to take his father's place. We meet Oswald Cobb, aka the Penguin, played by Colin Farrell, who waddles through the lair of the nightclub from the movie. The Penguin removes a set of blackmail materials in Carmine's old office. Alberto walks in, and then Penguin needs to pretend he's not doing anything nefarious. They discuss Alberto's plan to alter the drugs on the street in pursuit of a better high. And then Penguin starts telling a lengthy story about Rex Calabrese, who is well liked, but when he is 14, Rex has a heart attack and dies. Alberto mocks Oz's desire to just be beloved by everyone, and as a result, Oz shoots Alberto in the chest multiple times. Cut to the title card of the show. So that's the opening scene. Let's talk about it, Patrick. I have to say, I was impressed with the look of the show in many ways. I think they convinced me that it's the same location from the movie. Like you remember that location from the movie. And I don't know if they shot in a real location, if it was a soundstage, whatever it was, whether it was a soundstage or they dressed up the location to look the same. I was like, oh yeah, that's the place from the movie, which is kind of cool to watch a show that's a continuation of a movie and have it be in the same place, because often like logistics don't allow you to do that. The one, and in general, it's rare to have a TV show that is a direct continuation of a movie, right? Like, I think the last time I can remember that happening is probably like WandaVision, where it's like, oh, this is directly connected to something that happened in a movie, and also Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I guess, which is not a show I like to mention very frequently. But anyway, Patrick Klepek, what'd you think of this opening sequence as a way to set up what's going on in the show?
Yeah, to your point about the visuals, I mean that was a question I had for the Penguin in general. Like, part of what makes, there's a lot of things that make the Batman work. And a huge part of it is the visuals. Like, it is just a incredibly striking movie. Like, there are so many parts of that film that, like, even as the plot and the characters have faded from memory a bit, like, there are scenes and visuals from the Batman that have stuck with me. And that is evidence of like real incredible work by Reeves, cinematographer, lighting people, and a budget that you're probably not going to have on a show like The Penguin, even if it is a big splashy Max/HBO show. And so that was part of my concern going in. I was like, if you're chasing that, it's an extremely high bar to chase that could feel like you're chasing it. If you can see you're chasing it, it's not going to feel great. And I think in general, it's a good looking show, but that also is a show that the Batman is mostly in the dark. And the Penguin, once we get out of the nightclub, is often taking place in the daytime. And then I think allows to try and establish a little bit more of its own visual identity that doesn't feel like it's just running after what was established in the Batman film. But as an intro, I think it does a really fun, especially if you've sort of forgotten, like, what was the Penguin up to? What was his I didn't rewatch the film before sitting down with the show. And so I have my memories of like what happened in that film. But I think this does a really good job of sort of reminding you of what kind of character like Colin Farrell's take on and Matt Reeves' take on the Penguin is, which is like, he's smart-ish, he's cunning-ish, he's kind of a dumbass-ish, and he's impulsive. And the hard cut to the title card is fantastic. It's one of my favorites.
It's a good one
in a while
it's
because you kind of get the sense like, oh yeah, like look, he tricked this guy who clearly has like addiction issues. Like he's got him in a space where like he's going to be able to start manipulating him. Look at the Penguin. He's being the Penguin. And then all he does is get under the Penguin's skin, under Oz's skin just a little bit and blap, 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 blap. And I think he says something to the effect of like, oh shit. And then it's cut to card. And I was like, it's not a show.
I think it's an F word. It's an F bomb.
Yeah, but it's funny. It's like it's comedic, and that's not necessarily the tone I was expecting from like the Batman the movie is like gothic and serious and like morose. And here again, they're going for Sopranos-Lite or Sopranos adjacent, but there's more of a comedic aspect that is established right from the gun that I wasn't anticipating as much.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In terms of the look of the show, I agree with you that the show looks pretty cool, like pretty great. Like many of the scenes feel like they could have come out of the movie. I do think when we start to do things like go to the suburbs, for instance, it's weird to think of the Penguin's like purple vehicle as being in like a real environment. It's like, the more you see like the elements of the movie, the Batman juxtaposed with kind of real life recognizable things, it feels more jarring. You know what I'm saying?
Even the waddle, I feel like they're constantly. That's how he walks. It's in a universe, a take on, and we can get in this later because it's actually one of my problems with Reeves' take on the Batman, which bleeds over into the Penguin. Like, okay, how are we? What are essentials of the Penguin? Like, well, we're tossing out most of the like more fantastical elements of the character, but he's gonna waddle. And it just feels like, well, he's got to waddle everywhere because that's just how he walks. And sometimes it feels like the show is going out of its way to be like, we can't just constantly show him waddling because at some point it looks sort of silly. And I feel like that goes hand in hand with your point about the suburbs and the purple car. Like at times, some of the bits that have been set up for these characters in this universe, then when dropped into a show that has to be 60 minutes, you know what I mean? Like there are elements that work better in isolated chunks of a 2+ hour film, but start to strain when dropped into something that has to be on camera constantly for a 60-minute show that's going to extend, 8-ish episodes.
I didn't necessarily mind it. They do explain that component of it, that he does have a physical deformity, basically, that makes him walk in a specific way. And you can imagine why a person that walked that way in this world would have a nickname like the Penguin.
Sure.
But I understand kind of generally the point you're making is that when you take a thing that's supposed to be referenced for like, you think about it for like 10 seconds in the movie and expand it into an 8-episode miniseries, you may examine things more closely than you would otherwise. And things may strike you more. Anyway, so Oz disposes of Alberto's body. Oh, but the other thing I wanted to say is, it is a little weird to introduce a character and then kill him in like 5 minutes. I think my guess is they're like, when they're writing this show, they're like, okay, we need him to assassinate someone. Oh man, I really wish he could have assassinated Carmine Falcone. That would have been awesome.
Yep.
But sadly, that character died during the movie. So they're like, what if he had a son that we killed? And it's like, okay. And it's fine. It works. I'm not like complaining about it. I just think it's like, oh, they clearly just wanted him to kill someone important, and then the other guy important already died. So they're like, now we have to make up a new person that's important.
Well, yeah, it's a form of a it's not retconning what happened to the Batman,
Right,
but it's definitely
right.
a consequence of we developed this show after we made the
Right.
movie.
Yeah,
Had we
yeah,
done
yeah.
these in parallel, events might have happened differently in the Batman.
Right. Absolutely. Anyway, Oz disposes of Alberto's body. He encounters hoodlums trying to jack his car tires, and he accosts one of them, whose name is Victor Aguilar. He enlists Victor's help in disposing of Alberto's body, and he's on the verge of killing Victor. But Victor, I'll just refer to as Vic from now on, begs for his life, and Penguin decides to take Victor under his wing, pun intended. What did you think of Oz and Vic's relationship during the course of the episode, Patrick?
It's interesting. I didn't really buy it to start. It seems like too much of a risk for Oz at the beginning. And like he doesn't know this guy. Be one thing if like, hey, I vetted you, had one of my men check you out, like,
Right.
now if, there's not even like some throwaway exposition to be like, does this person have any connection to like anybody in this unit? Like it just sort of very quickly they want to buddy him up with an up and comer. And I get that. That's a fun to have these two rise together and this kid prove himself. And by the end of the episode, he's fine. I guess I feel like he's fine. I don't think he's the strongest element of the show. He seems mostly to exist as a character, like almost like in a video game where it's like, we need this NPC to do something for the main character. And like the camera is always going to be on Oz, but like we need somebody like put the brick on this car and like, you know what I mean? And they don't have a bunch of other characters to pick from.
Right.
So they kind of have to introduce this one. So over time,
like this
maybe
character serves like plot functions of he does stuff on behalf of Penguin, and also he's a way for Penguin to verbalize feelings that he has. So Vic is basically like a really nice sort of storytelling mechanism. But I agree with you that
not much of a character yet. It's just it's a function for the plot and to help the main character. But as a character himself, there's not a lot.
He kind of has a speech impediment, and that might have generated some sympathy from the Penguin side. But the only thing that's a little challenging from a credibility perspective is that or suspending disbelief perspective, I should say, is that the Penguin has just committed literally one of the worst crimes you could commit in Gotham, which is he has murdered a mob boss. But yeah, it's like, okay, it would be one thing if he had built up this kid's he had found this kid months ago and then took this kid in to help him with this Alberto thing. But it's like the show doesn't have many episodes, so it has to combine all this stuff into one thing. And hey, on the night that I murdered the mob boss, guess what, kid? I'm going to trust you with this information that if literally anyone else knew it, I would be dead.
Well, he's, and he's supposed to be connected and running these operations. There's nobody in those operations that makes more sense than this random kid assaulting
that makes
your
sense
car.
Because he doesn't want anyone in his operation to know that he killed Alberto Franco.
It just feels like
he needs someone young that he can trust and who's outside of the system. So anyway, I think you and I are both skeptical. You and I are both skeptical. Anyway, Penguin goes to a drop distribution site. Remember, in the universe of the film The Batman, there are these things called drops, which is basically like drugs. Anyway, he goes to a drop distribution site where he starts doing some blackmail and helps out with some of the operations, because it turns out the events of the Batman with the flooding and all the explosions and stuff have thrown the underworld into chaos. Side note, I think they are trying to do some social commentary here, right? Where they reference that, hey, in the event of a natural disaster or an unnatural disaster, in the case of the Batman, it's often the people who are poorest that are hardest hit.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty pointed in the opening sequence of the show. I am curious if they're going to expand on that in any way. Anyway, Penguin's called to meet his bosses, including Doug Stamper from House of Cards. He's one of the bosses. It turns out they're going to shut down the drop plant and move it to Robbinsville. And they tell Penguin he has 48 hours to initiate this plan. Penguin tries to pass off Alberto's plan of making the drugs more intense as his own. Little does he know, Carmine's daughter Sophia has shown up, Alberto's sister. She's looking for Alberto. We learn that she used to be at Arkham, but she's been fully rehabilitated. Anyway, they go out to dinner, and it's revealed that Sophia was in Arkham for murder. And Alberto had cooked up his plan to revolutionize the drug business with Sophia, she's wondering why he's presenting it as his own. So Oz makes up this story about how Alberto's on a bender, and Alberto also looped Oz into it, unbeknownst to Sophia. And that's why he's presenting it as his own, because he wants to like get this thing off the ground. I thought that was a pretty cool sort of move by Oz to kind of be like, oh yeah, like I was also in on the plan, and I'm sorry he didn't tell you that I was in on it. Boy, is my face red, kind of thing. I thought that was good. But I think that Cristina Milioti in this episode is awesome, because you can tell she's a killer, and also everything that she says is said with an air of suspicion. Like she doesn't trust any of the bosses. She doesn't trust Oz, and you can tell that she's trying to figure out what's going on. I think she is a very fearsome presence in the show. But yeah, Patrick, any thoughts on these scenes with her in them, and how this whole plot line is developing?
Well, for one, I mean, part of what's entertaining about the lunch is a lot of this episode is, well, let's put Oz in a situation where he should be fucked, and like, how's he gonna
Right.
like, what's the tweet about Donald Trump? Like, we nailed him this time. Like, how's he gonna wriggle out of this one? Oops! Like, he did it again. And there's something, there's a quality of that to Oz here, where it's like,
So
are you back?
let me just quote this correctly, okay?
Yes.
I'd like to see old Donnie Trump wriggle his way out of this jam.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump wriggles his way out of the jam easily. Well, nevertheless.
Yes,
That's
there's a quality of that much better than my paraphrase. There's a quality of that to Oz that is really fun to watch, which is like, how is he going to navigate himself out of this situation? And that's a interesting. I'll see how long that setup continues, because that can't. It's fun to watch. It's entertaining to watch. He's good. He's good at it here. Increasingly, if that becomes the basic premise of the show, is like Oz constantly having to make up like some excuse to like pit people against one another, maybe that can start to strain credulity like at a certain point, but it's fine here. Like, it works and makes for a really fun setup, especially where the episode ends up, where he finds himself in a surprisingly advantageous situation with the amount of people he's sort of BS'd along the way. And as to her specifically, I mean, there's just an unhinged like an almost Joker-like quality about her, where she's not wearing any makeup, she's not wearing a mask, she's not wearing a fancy getup, and yet she has all the qualities of a supervillain in like the Batman universe, where there's just something horrifying hiding underneath, and you get the sense that it takes all of her, like the character, like the person she presents as, this sister, this daughter, that's the mask. She's spending all of her energy masquerading as this person, when what's really underneath is like a complete nightmare. And I think a lot of the show is going to be her doing what she can to cap that, and Oz doing what he can to find ways to uncap that. And I think that will end up being a really fascinating, fun dynamic as the show goes along.
I agree. I just think she's wonderful in this role. And I mean, you mentioned Colin Farrell. He's also amazing. He's unrecognizable, obviously.
He really is. Like, I mean, like, there are times where I will like look up a picture on my phone and like hold it up and like, I sort of see it, but he's really under. He's really under there.
Yeah,
Like, it's a remarkable transformation.
I agree. And there is a scene where Oz is naked, and it's like, wow, they really went all the way with somebody put all the little hairs on the chest of that prosthetic suit to make it happen, and somebody made fake blood come out of the prosthetic suit when someone was cutting it. It's like, wow, they really went all the way with it. I do think it's a little like Colin Farrell is one of our generation's great actors, in my opinion. I do wonder why they didn't just get someone that looked like that. Like,
I mean,
possible.
that's the whole,
Right.
very valid criticism to the fat suit, in general, is like, there are numerous actors who can play, like Colin Farrell. Again, you're right. Great. Wonderful. He's delightful in this role. I love watching him. And yet, is there probably somebody of a build more approximating this character that could also have done a really wonderful job with this character and this setup? Yes.
Right.
And then you don't have to go through such elaborate setups to change Colin Farrell's natural build. And like, it's impressive technically, but it also seems like a bunch of work that didn't necessarily need to be done, and ignores all sorts of other. Again, that's where the criticism comes from. Is like, why do we need skinny Colin Farrell when like they're like perfectly fine, wonderful actors of larger body types that could naturally convey the power and build of the Penguin and also have a chance at a role that they normally wouldn't get because we just put skinny people in fat suits?
The logic behind hiring someone like Colin Farrell is a fewfold, right? Like on the one hand, it's the performance, but as we've already discussed, like there's plenty of talented performers that also have this larger build. Secondly, there is this idea that stuff often doesn't get stuff gets greenlit often in relation to the people that are in it.
Sure,
right? Like
that's definitely true.
So it's like maybe the fact that he's attached to it is going to motivate people to greenlight it financially. That said, typically people greenlight it financially because you can sell the movie. Like
you can't sell Colin Farrell.
You can't sell Colin Farrell because he's under these layers of prosthetics. So I'm like,
his
okay.
voice isn't recognizable either. Like he's not doing anything close to his natural speaking voice. Like everything is it's you know, it's capital A acting, but you lose what you're talking about, the marketing sort of benefit of putting a Colin Farrell.
Right, or put a different way, are people watching this show because Colin Farrell is in it?
No.
Or are they watching it because it's the Penguin, about the Penguin set in the Batman universe, you know? I would venture it's probably the latter. Anyway, and yeah, all the stuff you said about giving an opportunity to another up-and-coming actor, it feels like a missed opportunity in that regard. That said, again, Colin Farrell is really awesome in the role. So,
and I will say, part of what happens with when often they're putting skinnier actors into these larger suits, it becomes like a point of ridicule. And we'll see what happens over the course of the Penguin. But the Penguin is just presented as somebody of a larger build. It is not like we're putting Colin Farrell in this suit and then going to actively make fun. You know what I mean? Like that's part of where like it gets even worse. Is like we're putting these people in these suits so that we can then make fun of somebody who is a larger build. And that doesn't appear to be what's happening here. This is just what the Penguin looks like, and that's why he's in it. So it's better from that perspective, but it's not as far as it probably should have gone for sure.
Lauren LaFranc, the showrunner of The Penguin, had this to say about why they cast Colin Farrell in this role. Quote, Colin's not talented because of his appearance. I'm sure that doesn't hurt, but he's such a soulful actor who can do comedy and drama, so you still have that quality inside of Oz. I understand the question of why wouldn't you just cast someone who you want to look like Oz. Obviously, I'm quite biased. But after this experience of seeing what Colin can do, I realized Oz would be an inherently different character if he was not played by someone as talented and specific as Colin. He's a really emotional, incredible actor, and Colin's charm is really so much a part of Oz. I actually see Colin a lot through Oz now. I can't speak for Colin in terms of what that feels like, but I do imagine it's quite freeing for him in a way, end quote.
That's a wonderfully media-trained answer to a very difficult question. Absolutely. I don't blame that. I'm not going to knock, that answer at all. That is what you do media training for, where they come up with questions where like you were going to get asked about this. Here is like a very friendly answer to that. She can't give a real answer. Like the real answer is too complicated.
The real answer is they wouldn't make it if Colin Farrell wasn't doing it.
Probably not, right? Probably like not to the budget, not to the scale. And you're just not, that's not a PR friendly answer.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
The kind of answer she would tell you over drinks. But would not tell you in a interview with Variety or whatever.
As for this is from Deadline, I'm quoting from. As for Colin Farrell, he said, "quote I never want to put that fucking suit and that fucking head on again."
Did you see they made a beak for his penis?
Oh no, I didn't see that.
Yes, like what the prosthetic person like went all out and was like, "Do you really want to really feel like you're the Penguin?" Like I'll have to try and find the exact quote, but that has been a consistent part in Colin Farrell's as part of the press tour for this. That's what makes, why are we putting Colin Farrell in this suit? Colin Farrell is also asking, why are we putting Colin Farrell in this suit? Because he clearly it was his least favorite part about a show in which he's the set. I mean, hundreds of hours in all of this makeup and prosthetics. It's sounded miserable.
Apparently, artist Mike Marino created a detachable genital for the
There you go.
Penguin. This is I'm reading right now from GameSpot. Actually, speaking with People Magazine, he says Marino is so twisted and brilliant. He said, "I made you a penguin penis." Colin Farrell said, really? They're not even going to see it. I don't know if I want to walk on set with a penguin penis. And he was like, no. It's detachable. It's Velcro. It's got a beak at the end of it. So I had, a penguin penis, which I have pictures of, end quote. There it is. All right. Anyway, Oz and Vic travel to the suburbs where Oz drives a Volvo to a nondescript house. It's Penguin. So in Gotham, they have Volvos still.
Sure. Why not?
It's Penguin's mom that's there. And Oz wants her to go into hiding, but she tells him to use this moment to seize control. So, Patrick, this was the moment in the show where I said, I don't think this is as good as The Sopranos. because if you have seen The Sopranos, you know that Tony Soprano's relationship with his mom was really complicated and one of the most compelling elements of seasons 1 through 3 of that show. And there's this moment where she says, "What did you do?" And he says, "I killed Alberto Falcone because he laughed at me." And I'm like, wow, that is a staggering amount of self-awareness for this guy. And it's like, I literally don't believe that character would say that. Like, I literally don't believe that the character as he's currently constituted would say that, in my opinion, because the thing about, like, when you watch all these mob movies, right? Like Martin Scorsese stuff and The Sopranos and all this, it's all about masculine posturing. It's all about who you represent yourself as. Never show weakness. Never apologize. Never confess to any wrongdoing. That is the mantra that these people all live under. And it's fascinating and compelling to watch. If you want to see it on the national stage, just watch Donald Trump right now. It's like the same ethos. And so for him to say, "I killed this guy because he laughed at me and made me feel small," it's like, no way that guy would ever say that. And that's when I was like, okay, like, this show is operating on a different level than The Sopranos, in my opinion. Now, you do have this interesting dynamic of the mom is basically now motivating him in a Lady Macbeth style way, which is kind of interesting, and we did not get that really in The Sopranos. So I do kind of like that. But Patrick Klepek, am I going too hard on the show? What do you think?
No, and they're inviting the criticisms, right? You can't create this.
Right.
It's the show doesn't exist
with this dynamic.
Yeah, this show doesn't exist without The Sopranos, right? Like it's clearly like it's drafting off of The Sopranos and then saying like, hey, but part of what's to make this interesting is we have, the Batman is like exists in this world. Like it's a more fantastic, if still, like pretty grounded version. Like, could that be interesting? Like that could be interesting. I think more at the heart of where I'm with you is this first episode goes out of its way to try and give a why to why is Oz doing this. And I don't think it ever really comes up with a compelling answer for why Oz is doing this. If it's just for power, like because you were mocked, like I can buy those things. And I can take those at face value, but because it's an hour-long drama, we have to really get into the why. We can't just sort of in the way like a supervillain is presented in a film, like sort of we're gonna paper over the yada yada yada, like why they're doing this and just get to they're doing it, and then the whole interesting part is how the heroes respond. Here we're spending time with a quote villain and really getting into the why of what they're doing. And I just don't think this episode, I honestly don't care that much. Where we get to and the dynamics at play, I think are really interesting. But the show invites, we're going to give you a satisfying why for how Oz is going to rise in Gotham. And my first impulse is, I don't care. But then the show says, but we care. And if the show says we care, then you got to give me a good reason. And him going to the suburbs to see his mom, a character that we've had no interactions with, and she just sort of, because you got to do it, son. Like it doesn't. It wasn't enough for me.
Because my mom told me to.
Because my mom told me so. I found it far more compelling with the mom part. I think you could. I think actually the show is probably better if you just take that whole scene out of the show and include that as motivation. The fact that in the intro we get that he is shallow, petty, and impulsive, but like wildly creative and street smart.
Yeah,
That's enough. That is enough. Like they're making fun of him like because he's a goofy, because he's the Penguin. Like that's motivation enough for this character to rise to the criminal underworld.
Right, like he's been underestimated his whole life, and now he wants to show you.
That as a motivating factor. That is a trope, but that trope can be fun. And here, like, I just hope they don't go back to them. Like, I don't need another mom check-in. Like, if that's just here and we never revisit that as why Oz is doing what he's doing, I think the show will be better for it. Again, I kind of just moved past it, but I don't think it was necessary. And I think it was emotional development the show feels like it needs to have for like additional gravitas. Like we're a television show. And I just don't think it needed it. Like get on to the fun stuff like that you've already established.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you're going to get your wish there. I do think Penguin's mom is going to be a huge part of the show, is my guess.
And hopefully it's more, hopefully more interesting,
yeah,
right?
She's played by a very talented actress,
Yep.
Deirdre O'Connell.
Yep.
Who's wonderful. And I think it also is like, putting aside the motivation, Patrick, I do think it's a way to give more stakes to the Penguin, right? Like he has something to lose, basically.
She's gonna die. She's going to die. Like, I have not seen any episodes further in the show. I'm not like vague spoiling, but like she exists, and that's why you cast. You're right. She's gonna come back because you, in the same way that you cast Colin Farrell to get a budget, you cast someone like this because they're not doing a one-off 5-minute scene. But she's also like she's gonna die. Like she's dying in a future episode of the show for some emotional impact. So the Penguin can also go, "Rah, no!" It'll be good. It'll be good. I bet Colin
That's gonna be the
really
one that Colin Farrell submits for the Emmy reel, is when he goes "Rah!" after she dies. Yeah. So anyway, that said, yeah, Deirdre O'Connell, awesome actress. Like it's gonna be fun to see whatever goes down there. All right. Penguin meets with Salvatore Falcone and says he'll go work for him, but he gets rebuffed until he gives him his old ring, taken off of Alberto's dead body, which really gets his attention. We'll see what ends up happening there. But then Sophia's looking for Oz. There's a chase scene. She apprehends him and tries to torture the truth out of him. But before she can kill him, Alberto's body shows up in the back of a car that's driven onto the property via a cinder block. Nice to see Clancy Brown in any show.
Oh, yes.
Super talented guy, and he plays Salvatore Falcone, and their interaction is great. And I like that he's like, I don't trust you at all. This, because like the dynamic is, oh yeah, Penguin's going to team up with this other guy, and that's how he's going to get out of the Sophia thing. And then Salvatore's like, I don't trust you at all. Please get out of my face. Don't come back here. And it's like, oh, okay, that didn't go the way I thought it would. So it's nice. That makes sense in the universe. There is this fun chase scene where Sophia tries to find Oz. And he drives to this kind of disaster recovery site and gets in his own trunk and tries to pretend like he fled, and then he gets out of I thought that was a nice moment, but obviously it did not work.
Well, then also the purple car. They establish up front, like, your ridiculous purple car.
Yes.
Hard to forget. Hard not to spot. And
Absolutely.
I hope for Oz's sake, keep that purple car, man. Don't let him take you down. Like, don't change that color. Like, keep that purple.
Agreed. And then there's a scene where Sophia tortures this kid who was there trying to carjack the Penguin or take one of his tires or whatever. And she just shoots the kid in the head in cold blood.
Brutal.
Which is pretty chilling, I have to say.
Yeah.
It really shows you what that character's capable of in a way that makes sense of the universe. But before she can do anything worse to Oz, the Alberto's body shows up in the trunk of this car. One thing I have to say, we've been picking some nits here, Patrick, and I find it a little bit unbelievable that the idea that this kid Vic could.
Oh, dude, I roll eyes in the back of my head as this is playing out.
Yeah, because if it was Salvatore's people that did that, then actually it's Salvatore. I said Salvatore. Falcone, but it's Salvatore Moroni. I apologize. He's part of a competing crime family.
Yes.
Did I say Salvatore Falcone? Anyway, if it was Salvatore Moroni's people, then that would make sense. But it's Vic did this whole thing himself, and how did that even work?
I mean, otherwise, Oz is completely effed. Like there's no talking his way out of this. He's looks like he's about to lose an arm. Like at a certain point, like he's done, and the show gives no, it's patently unbelievable that this random kid who was part of a carjacking and then just happens to line up with Oz suddenly would have enough smarts to orchestrate like everything that happened here.
Well,
And
it sounds like they worked on it together.
Off screen.
They collaborated on it together. It sounds like,
Yes.
right? They talked about it, but I mean, just physically move. It's made clear in the last scene that the kid took care of the body moving and everything, right? So it's like, so how did the kid just like moving a 150-pound body is, from one car to the other car? Anyway, like
it's just a little. There's a lot that's happening in this pilot and this stuff specifically that feels convenient. Like we need to get these pieces in place so everything else can play out. And they're like Oz's relationship with this kid feels like, this is a 3-episode arc. Like we're gonna do it in one episode so we can move the plot along. And so I hope they're able to do justice to the character, to give it more to work with, more for the audience to chew on. Because if he's just a young foil for Oz, to kind of like the therapist in The Sopranos, like how does Oz talk about himself? Well, he's got this kid and he sees himself in this kid. And so he talks about himself like through this kid. Like I understand the plot and character reasons for him to exist, but I want him to be an actual character. And it just feels like they accelerate, much like the brick on the car, their relationship and this kid's development to just have these chess pieces in place by the time the episode concludes. And it can still work fine, but it feels really rushed by the end of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I will say, okay, actually, the body moving might not be a problem, because when they got to the junkyard and disposed of Alberto's body, like that was probably the car that ended up being driven onto the property.
Yeah, they move him into the car.
They move it into the
together.
car. So that's not a nit to pick, but the whole cinder, like getting the car to the location, the cinder block, everything like that, not being caught, all that.
They don't
stuff.
have more bodyguards like in that complex. It doesn't like where did he slingshot that car from? Like man,
Right,
are there no gates?
Yeah, exactly. There's all these questions about how that all went down, and
it's fine. It's cool. Like I can. Look, it's Batman. Like I can accept the rule of cool. But this is a show that, it's very grounded. It's taking itself seriously. We're saying we're in a quote real space, and once you remove the fantastic, like I'm going to start picking nits over like what's happening in the grounded space as opposed to hand waving things because they exist in a more fantastic space.
Indeed. Any closing thoughts on the Penguin episode 1, Patrick Klepek?
I alluded to this in the beginning. It's just a problem I have with Reeves's take on this universe in general. And basically what we've seen from Batman on screen for, how long was Batman Begins? Is that 20 years ago now? Is it that long?
I hope not. But yes, 19 years ago, yeah.
Batman is a comic book character who lives in a fantastic world with fantastic characters. And the depiction of Batman on screen, largely absent things like the Gotham television show, is to do their best to erase the fantastic elements of Batman, as if they're afraid that you can sell this character and this world without grounding it in a reality where we're supposed to simultaneously buy that a man in a bat suit is running around fighting crime, but we can't have a character like Mr. Freeze or other characters like that. And that is no more like Nolan straddle that to a certain degree, and then the Batman is an even finer degree of like F the comic book elements of this world. Like what I'm interested in is all this other stuff. And it's just, I think it's limiting. I think it limits the possibility space of this world. I think it's kind of cowardly, frankly, to just be afraid of the source material to that degree. And I still like the Batman and I like the Penguin, but it irritates me how much the creatives that have been the stewards of Batman on screen for so long are afraid of many elements of what actually defines Batman as a character in a world. And I actually think it would be to the benefit that they found more ways to incorporate that stuff instead of pretending it doesn't exist. And that begins with, we just won't call him the Penguin. Can I get permission to call him something more normal? It's not his name. Like, It just seemed it's just a
Wow,
it's a broader problem I have with Batman on screen from the last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that issue overall. I'm surprised it's coming from you because I just think you're not a purist in general. Is my
I'm not,
sense,
and
right?
I'm not.
Yeah.
It's 20 years. You know what I mean? It's not like it's a take on Batman. This has become the defined presentation of Batman. I think that's going to change with, like, we're going to get this parallel Batmans in theory with James Gunn. James Gunn is somebody who is the complete opposite of a Matt Reeves. Like, looks at the most fantastical elements and says, not only can I sell you on that, I'm going to make you fall in love with what's absurd about it, which is the defining part of what makes Gunn's take on the Guardians of the Galaxy work. And so I know he's not directing Brave and the Bold, the Batman movie in his universe, but I expect that will be a much more holistic, like, this is what Batman is on the page, and we'll find a way to interpret that on the screen. It's more the universal take on this grounded version, this realistic version of Batman. It's less, I loved the Batman, and I like the Penguin. It's more, now it is becoming in pop culture, like, well, actually, what the Batman is
right?
Is like this grit.
Is this how everyone thinks of the Batman is?
Correct.
Right? Like, yeah.
Correct.
And you can see that also with this new Joker movie that's coming out too, right? Like,
yes, that's even more stripped down.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is a very ultra grounded version of the Joker.
Yeah. It's clearly popular. So, maybe I'm out here, and this is what
it's the children who are wrong, Patrick.
Yes.
It's the children who are wrong.
And I like all the Nolan films. I like the Reeves stuff. It's more just like I wanted to make that broader point, and like it was really reinforced by the Penguin and the name change with Oz. Like, as I saw that headline going around, where it's like, at some point, just embrace the source material and find your way through it, rather than looking for excuses to not incorporate it. Anyway, end of my rant.
I think the Penguin has some compelling stuff in it, specifically because of the acting performances. Like, this is a show I'm going to watch to see what Colin Farrell and Cristin Milioti do during the course of the season. And even if it was a pure acting exercise, it'd be worth it. Whether they could do anything deeper and more compelling than that remains to be seen. But so far, so good. So we will continue to cover the Penguin right here on Decoding TV. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.